Welcome to the Billion Insight podcast. I'm your host, Shree. I want to take a moment to acknowledge our recent hiatus. We haven't been as consistent with our episode upload over the past few months due to some personal and professional commitments. However, I'm excited to share that I have some interesting things in the pipeline which I have been working on for quite a while, and I'm hoping to unveil them soon. We are also hoping to be as consistent as we used to. So that's the update for now. So, a few days ago, a friend of mine shared a post with me. The post highlights how Ronaldo didn't become a legend overnight. He dedicated thousands of hours, day after day, month after month, for years. Today's guest has shown a similar level of commitment in his field, having spent an equally relentless 45 years on a journey, but his arena is the human mind. His name is Dr. Craig V. Wiener, who is a licensed psychologist and human behavior researcher who has dedicated his career to help parents and clinicians understand that behavior is learned, not something we are born with, and how we can unlearn the habits and patterns that may be holding us back from reaching our full potential. He also an accomplished author of several books, including academic works, and he also an assistant professor at University of Massachusetts Medical School. In today's episode, we will explore the psychology behind behavior, why ADHD may not be what we always believe, and uncover valuable insights about parenting, discipline, and human development. So get ready for a deep practical conversation that might change the way you see children and yourself. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Craig B. Weiner to the show. So welcome, sir. Welcome to the Billion Insight
Oh,
podcast. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks for inviting me.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on our show, sir. As a tradition in our show, we often start our podcast from the guest childhood. So, sir, can we take a trip to the beginning? Let's start with your childhood. You were born and raised in the US, right?
Yes,
So, which era did you grow up in US?
I grew up in Massachusetts. I grew up in the Northeast in the United States, and my father was a psychologist professor at Clark University, so I was exposed to psychology even as a little boy growing up, and so that was part of the family tradition. And my mother was a sculptor and an artist, so I got
Hmm.
a little of both worlds as growing up.
So, sir, which era it was? Was it in 1960 or 70s?
Oh, well, so I grew up in the 50s, actually the 1950s, and then I was more of a teenager in the 60s and in college in the late 60s and 70s. Then I've been doing a private practice for about 46 years as a clinical psychologist. So I've seen
Yeah.
thousands of clients, families, couples, individuals, and over the years, I've watched psychology develop in a way that's been more and more medicalized and less based on uh, learning and living in the world. More about what diagnoses a person might have and how they're stricken with particular disabilities or delays or deficiencies. And most of psychology
Mhm.
has drifted into compensation for some kind of condition that requires remediation of a deficit
Hmm.
or delay. And I've gone in a different direction, which I've highlighted living in the world and developing and learning, and how the person's life evolves and the way they learn to cope with situations. And that's how I've learned to assist people by helping them learn to cope differently based on what they've learned as a coping strategy in the past.
That's very interesting. So your father was psychologist, so this is kind of your family tradition. You kind of following his path.
Yes, it's a lot
Mhm.
of kids learn to get acquainted with things through what their parents are doing. So
So, sir, how was Massachusetts for you during your formative years?
it's only the way I knew it would be. It would be. It's the Northeast in America is very different from the South and the Midwest. There's different kinds of living in the world. So there's a lot of colleges and academics in the Northeast, and so a lot of a lot of stress on education, and the climate is the climate has 4 seasons, so it's different than has long winters, but it also has all the seasons, so it's a little different than places where they have a very short winter and a very hot climate.
I was reading about your book and about your previous interview. The one thing you often say is that people aren't born with beliefs. So, can you explain how beliefs are formed through behavior rather than logic?
So it's a difficult problem because there's a whole interaction between the person and the way they respond to the world. We're all different in the way we respond to the world. So if you put people in the same environment, they might learn different kinds of things because each person reacts to the world in their particular way. And then as they learn, their responses change too, because then they learn to respond differently based on what they've already learned historically. So there's an interaction, always a development of the person. So what happens over time is we encounter certain kinds of environments and we learn within those environments in different ways, and then we keep responding differently depending on what we've already learned and what's worked for us in the past. So if a person has, every time they walk by a stove and they get an electric shock, then they're going to learn to avoid a stove. And people who don't get shocked by the stove learn not to be so anxious when they get near a stove. So then we wonder why people are so uptight when they go near stoves, because they get an electric shock every time they go near it. So, and some people don't. So you have to kind of look at what's happened to the person over all the years they live, and what their parents were like, and how their parents responded to problems, and how the child responded to the parents when they were doing their parenting. So there's an unraveling of the person's life that has to occur. It's not really simply you have a chemical disorder and therefore we give you a drug. There's a lot of reasons why
Yeah.
people might learn to behave the way they do.
Yep, yep, yep. So, is there any psychological reason we label others so quickly? If someone is riding a Tesla, then we will kind of associate that he's riding a Tesla. He must be a supporter of Elon Musk. Thus, he's a supporter of Donald Trump. So, he must be a far right. Is there any psychological reason why people always label others so quickly, left or right, or good or bad, even though we all are gray?
Okay, so I think that's a great question. So it depends on the whole, like what we're talking about, looking at the development of the person. So if you grew up and your father was kind of had a temper, or was controlling, or seemed mean, or didn't understand very well, and uh, you, you start to see be cautious about, are all men like that? And then if once you become negative to a parent for certain behaviors, if another person behaves in similar ways very quickly, you might protect yourself by jumping to the conclusion that this is a person to be dangerous or problematic. So in America, the whole notion of what does Trump, you're asking about Trump, right? Were you asking about Trump? I wasn't sure.
Yeah, actually, not necessarily just Trump. I mean, I'm saying that if people see that someone is saying something about Trump, they kind of believe that yes, he is talking about Trump, so he must be a rightist. If he is talking about Biden, he
Yeah,
must be
so that,
leftist.
so people, to protect yourself and live in the world, you have to make categories, and you have to kind of respond to the world with categories. So
Mhm.
if you see a person with a particular outfit on, you have to know, well, what is that outfit associated with?
Yep.
What is that hairstyle associated with? So it's a way to make sense of your unpredictable world. So you have to have some idea of what in the past has happened with situations like this, and what have I learned to do, or what have I learned happens in these kinds of situations. So I've got to learn to respond in a particular way as a way to uh, know that I'm going to adapt to what's likely to happen. So then, as I learn more about the person, I say, well, I don't have to worry about that stuff. This person's very different than that. So that all the
Yep.
correlates that go with that person don't have to occur. So, but most of the time, we're dealing with unfamiliar people out in the street. We don't know who they are, what they're likely to do. So we have to make quick judgments about what's likely to happen, given the way they look, or how they appear, or what we know about people who seem to appear this way or look this way, if they're male or female, or tall or short.
So is there any psychological things that can denote to such type of people? Why I'm asking is that nowadays we are seeing that the extreme right, extreme left situation. Nobody is thinking that he could be in the center. He's riding the Tesla. That doesn't mean that he must have to be support Elon Musk's ideology, right? But people nowadays
Yeah.
is
So
kind of think it's extreme. Yeah,
yes. So then you're saying, well, why do people do that? Well, it's probably uh, people make enemy. If there's any difference, I make the difference. They must be wrong rather than different. They're doing that in
yeah,
psychology. If the person behaves differently, they must have a disorder. It's not that they just have a difference, a difference rather than a disorder. So we're constantly demonizing and making the other person has to be wrong. There has to be a right and a wrong, and it's very
yeah,
difficult to
yeah,
see that sometimes the middle ground isn't even possible to do. So if I'm threatened by something that's different than me, then I make the other person evil. I have to make it a
yeah.
bad, and that protects me better than anything else. But I get permission to destroy them if I make them evil. Then now I have permission to get rid of anything that's different than me.
Yep, yep, yep. Since we're talking about the belief, what do you think? Why people are stick with so strongly with their belief, even though the facts which will be presented them, which contradict them, still they are kind of believe the same thing. You know that flat Earth theory. Most many people are still believing that the Earth is flat. So, what do you think? Is this is kind of a disorder? Why they are so glued to their beliefs?
Because my beliefs have helped me survive, and I get scared to give up what I know has helped me survive and what I've experienced and how I've learned to live in the world. So if you're asking me to give up what I've learned to do to cope, it's very scary
Yeah.
to let go of that.
So, sir, do you think that the therapy or psychological tools can help the society deal with this polarization?
It's very difficult to have people recognize new ways of understanding things, but it's the same problem of having kids learn to not be oppositional and to cooperate. Once the kid learns to feel like the parent is being unreasonable or the parent doesn't care, how do you get the kid to want to please the parent once you've protected yourself by not trying to have a relationship? A lot of people don't want to be disappointed and take the risk of trying to have a relationship. It's safer to not even try. How many people give up about because it's almost as if having a disappointment is. I'd rather not risk having a disappointment, or
Yeah.
I'm afraid that if I do what you want, something bad's going to happen to me because what I've learned is that something bad's going to happen if I do something different.
They are kind of want to play safe.
Yes, it's a safety, and that's what's going on
Yeah.
in society. It's becoming more and more safety oriented, where
Yeah.
every person's difference becomes a threat. So, and that's one of the reasons why people want to be the same. Because if everybody's the same, I'm safe. Because no one will be different.
Mm.
Because different is dangerous.
Let's talk about the ADHD. You also mentioned that ADHD is a learned behavior that kids pick up. So before we dive into, can you quickly explain what ADHD is? Can you define ADHD?
Well, yeah, ADHD is there's a book called the Diagnostic Manual, and they list different diagnoses, and there are lists of behaviors that people do, and if you do those behaviors, you get the label. So the label is just a description of people who behave in a particular way. Now the problem is, why do people behave in that particular different way? And
Yeah.
the view that's taken hold in America, and I think throughout the world, is that there must be something biologically peculiar about these people who behave in this particular way. But they've studied this problem for years and years, and they don't really have any biological prediction like in Down syndrome or something that they can identify. So what happens is who's more likely to learn those behaviors? Well, kids who are more active than other kids who have language delays, or kids who have motor problems, or kids who have health
Dyslexia.
problems. What's or if you have difficulty reading, then school becomes a problem. So then, why would you participate and try in school as much? You'd probably want to avoid. So the question for me became, how do we account for those people who avoid when they're required to participate and contribute, and people who intrude when you're required to wait and defer? So there's a variation. That's what the so-called symptoms are, variations of intrusive behaviors and avoidant behaviors. And so I kind of help parents. There's all these different histories that go with coming to those behaviors over time. And a lot of boys are more like, when if a kid is wanting more attention or getting reinforced to be a clown or being silly, then they might get reinforced more often to be hyper. If they're silly and hyper, then it's difficult to make them do what we want. They're more difficult. It's more difficult to take my eyes off of them. They can monopolize the social situation much more. If you dislike what people are imposing on you, you may be distracted. You may want to escape and avoid. These are all different psychological ways to understand these behaviors that we've medicalized. And now they have all these drugs they've been putting mostly boys on for half a century or more, well over half a century. And the outcomes aren't really very good. And people who continue to behave intrusively and recklessly and avoid, they have poor health outcomes too. So there's a lot of consequences. And but the therapies are typically, in my view, not the therapies that would solve the problem. How would you help a person who's avoiding something learn not to avoid it and become more willing to be immersed in it and work hard and contribute and achieve and stick with it? Now, I could force the person. I could say, well, if you don't do it, I'm going to do this to you. I'll do that to you. But then they're only going to do it under duress. And when I'm not around, they're not going to want to do it anymore just because I forced them. Maybe some people learn, hey, it wasn't so bad. Maybe I'll do it. But by and large, I don't think you can solve avoidance by becoming more negative and more stringent. But if I think the person's defective or delayed, then, well, you want to watch over them and you better manage them and tell them what to do and make sure they get immediately rewarded because they won't pay attention to longer term outcomes. But I don't think it's about that. I think that you look at these kids, if they are interested in video games, they'll read manuals about how to do it. They'll play for long periods of time. They'll figure out how to solve the different dilemmas that the video game character has. They don't show
Yeah.
any of the behaviors. And it doesn't even have to stay with video games. If they like dinosaurs, they'll learn about every dinosaur around and they'll report everything. So it doesn't. The diagnosis never made sense to me as a cogent, consistent deficit of behavior. And it was why do they do it here and not do it there? And why are they avoiding? Why are they intruding? Why are they disrupting? Why are they not learning to wait their turn? How do they get reinforced to fuss and cry and overreact? And how do they not self-manage? Why do they require their parent to keep telling them brush your teeth? Like they don't know to brush their teeth like 1,000 times. They don't get a routine. Now, what are they getting out of having their parent constantly remind them? So those are the questions I asked for years and years, decades actually.
That is very interesting, sir. So basically, what I'm saying is here is that you don't want to quote the ADHD as a disorder. You believe that this is a behavioral.
It's a socially problematic set of behaviors that will lead to health problems, academic problems, marital problems. I mean, if you don't learn to coordinate your behavior with others and cooperate, you're
Yep,
going to have
yep, yep.
problems in life. And if
Yeah,
you're constantly pushing back against limits like speed limits and waiting your turn when you're driving, you're going to get in automobile accidents. And
yeah,
if you don't
yeah.
abide by, it's people they don't want to do. People are unhealthy for many different reasons, not just ADHD.
Absolutely. So this is kind of the thing that they are not interested in one particular thing, but whereas they can interested in other things. So as you mentioned earlier, the video game example, they are kind of interested in video games, so that they are not showing any symptom of ADHD during playing with the games. But in certain cases, which they kind of feel bored, so they show the symptom of ADHD.
Yeah. So the idea of being bored is an interesting problem because when years and years ago, if a kid said I'm bored, the parents say it's too bad. You have to do it. Now, if a kid says they're bored, they act like there's something wrong with
Yeah.
the activity. Now, I think if people are complaining that it's boring, it's like they're diminishing what other people are assigning and expecting. It's the person's discounting the value of what other people value. I can tell you what's boring is to
Yeah.
me is very valuable to you. So what is it? How is it embedded in the activity? So it's a real problem in terms of the person said the world's supposed to flex to what I want. I'm not supposed to accommodate to the world. And that was something that you had been interested in. That how did it become to be that we expect the world to change for me rather than I have to kind of learn to adapt to a world that's never going to be
Yeah.
perfect. And but so that's the kind of thing. So more and more people are protesting any kind of limits or standards or expectations.
So, one last question related to ADHD. So, if a child showing symptom of ADHD, so as a parents, what should you do? How you do? How you handle the situation without any medication?
Well, that's what's very difficult because it requires the parent to learn behaviors that they may never have been exposed to learn, which is how do you get attunement and agreement and cooperation with somebody rather than compliance and dominance and submissiveness or coercion, all the things that disrupt relationships. So if I want you to help take out the garbage on your own, put the garbage up on the curb so that it gets picked up, I could tell you, well, I'll take away your cell phone or I'll make you so you can't play your video games unless you do it. All right. Or I can say, let's have a particular kind of relationship where we're helping each other and we care about each other. Family relationships are based on love and care. They're not based on harm and coercion, which in society, you have to kind of have a penalty for going through a red light or
Yeah.
doing something harmful. But in a family, you want to train the notion we care about each other. So if I just have to help the kid learn. Would you, if you take charge of this, this would be a great help to us, and it makes it really nice for us for you to take care of these things. And if you're not doing it, I say, well, what's stopping you from doing it? And I said, what kind of relationship do you want with me? I think you like it that I do these things and anticipate for you and help you out. I kind of want the same relationship going both ways. What do you say? I'd rather get the person to do it under those conditions than to start becoming negative and punitive. And that's where I think parents have to learn the language of eliciting care and attunement and affinity and love. And it's a mutuality that's a very difficult thing to get in a relationship. And that's why people resort to coercion or drugs, because you just induce it with
Mm.
a drug. You can get somebody to achieve more if you hype them up with a stimulant. They'll do more of something they wouldn't typically do if you jack them up on something that enhances their dopamine. Uh,
Yeah.
but that's a problematic solution because you get used to the dopamine. Then if you don't have it, you get a kind of a downer, and then what happens to your body as it adjusts to getting too much dope? All these psychiatric drugs long term have all these complications for a person's health. So I'd rather do it this other way, and you start early and you help people learn these skills. But it's not what's happening. People are being told that people are deficient and they must have a compensation either through drugs or some kind of external control that the parent has to exert rather than the parent has to help the kid learn to accept social norms and work within a social fabric rather than just destroy the social fabric or change what's expected to the point where you're not required to keep trying.
Okay, sir. So now let's talk about your book. You have written many books. So, and most recently, you have wrote Backyard Politics. What led you to write that book?
Yeah, okay, so the book is called Backyard Politics. It's a psychological understanding of today's political and social divide. And the reason why I wrote the book is because I thought that the society was getting polarized and that the issues were similar to the kinds of things I was experiencing as a psychotherapist, which is there's always a problem of a person defining their struggles as caused by the outside world, most often by the behavior of others, versus the person who wants to change the way they live in the world because they realize that the way they're living in the world has not been helpful or advantageous or productive for them. And there's a very different kinds of clients, and some complain of what people are doing to them and what hardships are imposing on them. And it's almost as if they want me to change the world for them so that they could get better. And this happens a lot in couples therapy, where each person blames the spouse for their misery.
Yeah.
And in many ways, the problem is that both have to kind of learn to be different together as a way to make it work. Now, in what I noticed in politics is that over the years, the polarization occurs in a similar way, which is one side is protesting society and its structures and laws and rules, which seem to favor some over others, and the idea that some people have resources available to them that other people don't have. So there's a whole group of people who feel as if the way society operates is making it difficult for them to flourish or achieve or even function in any way, shape, or form. They're essentially being defeated by outside forces. So they're the rebellion, and they want outside forces to change. And then there's another group of people that say, well, no, it's not so bad. That you can learn to cope differently than the way you're coping. You can learn to flourish if you only did this or that, or change the way you're behaving. You could have success too. That it's much more a question of you learning more skills or coping differently. Now, the problem is when you have babies or infants, they're totally reliant on the external world. So there's no political debate with an infant, because we all know that the outside world has to change for the baby to live and persist. But over time, parents really have to help the young child learn to be more autonomous and learn to be more independent so that they can flourish and succeed. And you don't want to just keep doing things for the child. The child won't have the resources to manage the world effectively or learn skills that could help other people. They won't even learn who's going to help anybody if everybody is dependent on somebody else to do the helping. So there's got to be some promotion of the individual. So my view is that there's people who adopt the protector view, which is the first view, which is outside causes, and the promoter view, which is inside factors that you can change to. And if you listen closely to the political debate, it very quickly takes these two arguments, and the party that you align with is the one that you identify with as, yeah, I think that the person could be different, versus, no, I think they're being oppressed and mistreated. So you pick your party based on which side of the coin you're going to do. So I showed how this plays out with poverty and the notion of feminism and the notion of racism. And it's the same debate constantly with all these political issues. And then I tried to show that families do the same thing. You can bring your child up so that the child kind of expects the parent to do all the changing and make life happy and easy for the child, or you can have the parent be too hard on the child and the child gets to the point where they have no say at all. They're really oppressed in that way. Or you could help the child learn some middle ground, which is what you were suggesting earlier, which is the parent and child can learn to adjust to each other so that some reasonable pattern occurs. And this may include helping the child learn to adjust to society, but also in a way where the child doesn't feel as if they have no voice, or their struggles were just disregarded, or they were treated too harshly. On the other hand, you don't want to be so empowering of the child, or so willing to accommodate to the child that the child doesn't learn to meet any expectations. I think that there's so much affluence, people can just keep giving to them without the child having to give back. So that's the same quandary we're in society and we're in with families.
So you mentioned two things here. I would like to highlight that part. The protectors who focus on outside factors and the promoters who focus on the inside factor. Can you explain how you come up with this framework or this idea and how it helps you to understand the divide in politics today?
Well, I noticed this in psychotherapy, that there were people who expected the world to change, and other people were much more likely to consider changing themselves and changing the way they operate. And it's so I saw the thing play out in families and couples and individuals. And I said, well, gee, all the other issues seem to follow the same thing. Well, one person is saying, I want to be protected by. Well, usually it's you got to get somebody more powerful who's going to. In America, these are the educated elites that say they can make the world a protected world where everybody is going to be happy and flourishing and harm will be removed. And the other group is saying, no, you've got to help people learn and work harder. So one group is focusing on employment and work, and the other person's group is focusing on welfare and food stamps and aid, various kinds of aid. And one person's, so you can see where the emphasis is on either promoting the people or protecting the people. So I decided that
Yep, yep, yep.
that's a better category system. It's also not pejorative
Yes.
because instead of seeing the world as oppressors and oppressed, both sides are doing something useful. It's useful to protect and it's useful to promote. This is what you were saying earlier, which is why are we so extreme when we can't see the
Yeah,
combination of the two?
yeah, the centrist perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So, sir, we can say that protector is the left wing and the promoter is like the right wing.
Yeah, that's that in many ways it follows those lines, but as the protectors gain power, if you notice the right wing starts to complain they're being oppressed. Like if you have very few white people being promoted or hired, then they start to feel like the rules are against them, and they start saying, "We want protection. We don't want this new oppressive regime to come in." So it's a very tricky thing to use right and left because that's why I like to see it as a dynamic that has to do with where you're locating the problem. The people who are on the protector side will say, "Well, why are you complaining? Uh, you're privileged. You don't have to complain. You're just blaming other people. You could adapt to this new order. You don't see everybody's doing the same thing to each other."
Yep, yep. So why there is no a centrist political party who actually adopt a good thing of both of the sides and create a new perspective out of it? Don't you think this is feasible?
Yeah, so that's why when I wrote the book Backyard Politics, I tried to. If you look at the cover, there's two little figures on a on a balancing thing, so that's both sides of the coin. So the whole point is colleges stopped introducing the opposite position to students. They only expose students to the protector view, which is all the terrible harms of American society, and people stopped learning about the alternative view, which is the view of individual freedom to do capitalism or to get a voluntary exchange. They started to see capitalism as a exploitative system where people who got ownership of things had too much power, that the person who didn't have ownership. So they started to adopt a Marxist view of oppressed oppressor, and they stopped looking at the advantages of allowing more freedom and less government protectionism. See, government got bigger and bigger, and the more government got bigger, the more they did protectionism, which is each person in the government could make the case that I'll rescue uh, my people with these policies. I'll make life better for them by doing this for them. So it became a government instead of government was to say what are the limits of what you can do without creating harm versus what can I give you rather than what you can do. So it was a reversal. As government gets bigger and bigger, it becomes more and more protectionism. If you look at the tyrannical societies, they want total conformity. So then everybody has to be the same. Nobody can be jealous or envious that some people have more, some people have less, which is seen as a terrible harm. As if it's like a harm rather than a challenge to do better.
So, sir, what do you think? Who are the target audience of your book?
The target audience would be anybody who's interested in learning the best arguments I could make for both sides of the story. I made what I hope to be the best protector arguments and the best promoter arguments. And then I showed how they could be blended in child rearing so that the kids come out with what you're advocating, which is let's find a middle ground that actually brings up kids who are caring about others and at the same time willing to work hard to develop themselves so that they can both care for themselves and be in the position of helping others, because you can't help anybody if you don't have any skills.
That's very interesting, sir. To be honest, I haven't read the whole book, but this is really intriguing, I must say.
Okay, sounds great.
Yeah. Okay, sir. This is the rapid fire round. We call it instant insights,
Okay,
where I will ask you some quick question. You have to answer as fast as you can.
I'll try.
Yeah. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Yeah. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Beach or mountains?
Mountain.
City or countryside?
Countryside.
Blue or green?
Blue.
Early bird or night owl?
Early bird.
Best way to start the day?
Go for exercise.
Introvert or extrovert?
Extrovert.
Most recent hobby you picked up?
Running.
What is your go to stress relief method?
Relax.
Travel back in time or forward in time?
Forward in time.
If you could have any dinner guest, dead or alive, who would it be?
Okay. Thomas Sowell.
Who is he?
He's an American economist that he's a philosopher economist that is
Okay.
very impressive.
Best way to handle success?
Enjoy it.
Best way to handle failure?
Keep trying.
Best gift you have ever received?
Love.
What's the one skill you wish you had learned earlier in your career?
Reading.
One behavior every parent should notice.
What the child is doing well at.
Should kids apologize?
If they want to.
Okay. And what about the parents? Should parents apologize?
If they want to.
Most challenging part of your job?
Dealing with insurance companies. Yeah,
Most rewarding part of your job?
that people are learning new things and feeling better.
Yeah. You have seen the world both before and after the digital age. So, according to you, based on your vast experience, what are the three things that your generation had, the new generation lacks?
We had more free play time where kids had to learn to solve problems without parents always being there to solve parents for us. We had more social contact rather than digital contact, which
Hmm.
is becoming more and more problematic for people to learn relational behavior. They're not learning how to have relationships the same way
Hmm.
as in vivo relationships. Yeah.
And the vice versa. What the new generation had, the old generation lacks.
Uh, what they have more more entitlement and more options to be indulged.
Yeah. This is one interesting round. I will say a word, and you have to say the first thing comes to your mind.
Okay,
I hope you are not getting bored.
it's
Okay.
fine. Go ahead. Yeah,
Yeah. Food,
nuts,
nature,
green,
love,
uh, comfort,
trust,
relationships.
AI, artificial intelligence,
Yeah, mimic,
freedom,
hope,
music,
joy,
challenge,
difficult,
knowledge,
enriching,
friendship,
intimacy,
success,
happiness,
peace,
comfort,
regret,
discouraged,
wisdom,
excitement,
money,
security,
war,
death,
travel,
novelty,
politics,
conflict,
efficient.
ease,
Okay, one last. Is.
inevitability.
Yeah. Okay, sir, one last question of the podcast.
Yeah,
What is the best piece of advice that you ever received?
that people are different rather than deficient, delayed, disrupted, defective.
Great. So, sir, that's the end of the podcast. Any final thought? Did you like it?
Well, yeah, it was very, very nice. Thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Craig B. Wiener, and you've been tuning in to Shree's podcast, The Billion Insights. If you enjoyed our conversation, don't forget to subscribe and like the podcast. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leaving a 5-star rating would mean a lot. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for sharing your decades of experience. Your perspective on behavior and society is both refreshing and necessary in today's world. You have reminded us that behavior is not a destiny, it's something we can understand and shape. We are truly grateful for your time and your work. And to our listener, if you want to learn more about Dr. Wiener and his work, be sure to check out his book, The Backyard Politics. All the link you can find in the show note or the description. Thank you for joining us today. We hope to see you next time on the Billion Insight podcast. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and stay curious. This is Sree, your host, signing out. Peace.